All right. Looks like we're live. Welcome, everybody. It is another show about Mountain Dew League. So I'm Semmler, and with me is Boq. Boq, how's it going, man? You all right?
It's going pretty good. We've already actually started the season, so we missed out on some of the early season action before the show goes live. But obviously, we can talk about that as we progress through the show.
Yeah. I mean, it's all up on the website. If you just search Mountain Dew League in Google, it's the first thing that pops up. And you got all the results. You got the teams, which I like a lot. I actually feel like the Mountain Dew, League website is better than, the ESL website for some reason.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. That website looks really good. They did a great job with that landing page, the mdl.esca.net landing page.
Yeah, guys, go and check it out. Well worth it. It gets you up to date on everything. You even have, it's kind of like a mix between HLTV and E-League, I guess, or Liquipedia. Just because it actually lists all the teams. So you can just look at the teams, and then you got all the players. You see who's in, who's out. And it's actually quite exciting. There's quite a few big names that are back in the mix here with Mountain Dew League. I guess GX is the pretty standout one for me, at least, just because it's the return of the band boys.
Yeah. I mean, well, sort of, because there's also Torque too, Scott Steele. But yeah, the band boys. We actually watched them play last night. So far, both GX and Torque haven't had like the greatest start, at least for the band boys. The only one who's really done well is Swag. Torque played a match against, I don't remember who, but Four Shot, who is also a previously banned player, went nuts. And then and the other one was Swag. Swag really went ham on their match the other day.
Dude, well, I mean, for me, Swag is the great tearjerker,
Oh, of course.
Imagine if that guy had kept going after DreamHack Winter 2013, where he just beasted over there, when he was playing for Complexity under the wing of Sean Gares, and you just saw this diamond in the rough, this unreal talent. Ah, man. But I'm glad that these bans have been lifted. It actually allows for teams to start organizing around it. I mean, these aren't the only guys that have actually gotten back into it. Cali has just been accepted into Vexed after a 4-month trial period, so he's back in the mix now as well, mainly due to to these leagues lifting the bans.
And then we had this one didn't go so well, but FXYO, who had a very short stint with his team. I guess we don't want to talk about that one too much. But like the one with Four Shot was obviously for a different reason. But FXYO, he was notoriously banned, and he lasted a very short period of time in his first team.
You gotta fill us in. What went wrong? You're making it sound like it's juicy.
Well, I mean, we all know that this guy has a history of being a loud player. We'll say emotional. Emotional is the key word. He's emotional. And apparently things just didn't click with him and his current team, or whatever his current team was. So there's already drama. I think there's an HLTV article all about it, about how he was in and out pretty quick.
I still remember, was it 2014 when Foxy was still on Epsilon? And FXYO Shanks, somebody went for a knife on Cobblestone, and Shoxy lost his shit, just started shouting at, or basically chewed him out afterwards, saying this is unacceptable. You're not allowed to knife anybody. It's a mark of disrespect. And, I'm not gonna have anybody on my team who knives anybody. I was like, whoa! And FXYO was just sitting there like, well, I guess I just have to take this. It's Shoxy chewing me out after all. So I mean, yeah, he's got a bit of a history of being volatile. Yeah, but I mean, Mountain Dew League. So, I mean, if you want to give us a quick recap, actually, on last season, managed to show with Moses that you were able to do the wrap up. But give us a little bit of a highlight, like top 3 teams coming out of that last league, so that we can get an idea going forward into this one.
I mean, as far as NA is concerned, we actually had like kind of a surprise the last 2 seasons. The first season they were playing as Eclipse. They were like a team that nobody had heard of. They moved up from IM. They were one of the few teams in IM that actually had an org. So they were actually being sponsored playing IM. They won IM, made it to Premier, and everyone's like, these guys are going to get dumpstered. Like, they suck. They're a bunch of IM nobodies. They're going to get destroyed. Sure enough, they make it to MDL, and they placed, I think, second that season, lost the first round of playoffs. Rebranded as Rise Nation this season, again took first place, this time made it out of playoffs, and then did what all NA teams do at MDL finals and lost in the semis. We still actually haven't seen an NA team at MDL make it out as the number 1 seed in groups, or make it past the semifinals. Echo Fox, they were the one team that did it the first global challenge. They made the semis and lost notoriously to Crowns when JZ Walkings dropped 40 kills. And then the last season that we did in LA, we didn't even have an NA team make it out of groups. That was TSM and Rush and Muffin Lightning all played. All of them failed. And then we had last season in London, or England really, where it was Splice, E6, and Ghost. And Splice made it out, lost in the first round of playoffs. So in general, we see really good performances online from NA, but the second they hit LAN, they just get destroyed. And to be fair, like the competition the last few seasons from EU is really strong. Like even just looking this season at EU MDL, it's way, way above what we see in NA. Like NA is good, but yeah, like last season we had Space Soldiers and Flipside and Kingwin and Epsilon and Nexus, who is a team that not many people know, but they're like the #1 Romanian team. All of these teams, I think you match them against any of these NA teams, chances are they're probably going to win.
So is there any hope? Is there any hope? I mean, coming back full circle, right? The band boys. I mean, we've got some experience here. I mean, Steele, perhaps he might be a little light on his roster, but I mean, it seems like Dazed, he's got swag with him. Is that enough to maybe give us a chance this time around, do you think?
See, that's the part that I'm not sure of, because like a lot of people just assume they see Dazed, Swag, and AZK, and they're like, oh, they're just going to win. That's what they always did. Well, yeah, they did win against NA opponents, but the EU opponents didn't always just like fall over and die. Sure, you can look back at like I think it was season 15 of the Invite when they played Berry games in the double best of 3 coming in from the lowers and they won. And then season 16, 16 was when they played against Complexity in the grand finals. It was an all NA final. That was when Complexity beat like Virtus Pro, NIP, and Navi.
Oh, sweet Jesus, this is a stroll down mountain. Like that is a long time ago.
Yeah, I remember that LAN so vividly because it was the last time I played. It was before I became a caster. I played at Philadelphia and I got dumped, like destroyed, just absolutely shredded. And I came home with buddies and we were drinking, watching it like, USA is the most patriotic I felt. Like, screw the Olympics. I just want to watch NACS teams win. But yeah, it's been a long time. I mean, I would have to actually look to count the seasons it's been since we've seen them compete. You can't just expect those guys to just come in and all of a sudden be gods. The only one that I expect to see big things from right off the bat is Swag. Like, if I'm being perfectly honest, I think Daze is going to be kind of relatively statistically silent. AZK will take a while to warm up. I mean, AZK was one of the best NACS players ever, and probably still will be. But it's going to take time for him to come back. I mean, he's been playing Overwatch, so we all know what that game's like.
Exactly, man. But hey, what I'm wondering about is whether or not he's going to have learned something from the Quake legends that he's been playing with over in Overwatch, right? He was teamed up with Rafa for a while. I mean, that's interesting because Rafa's known as the mastermind. So I'm curious as to whether or not he may have, rubbed off on AZK a little bit. AZK going to bring that back and maybe, team up with Dazed. AZK is just such a chill guy. When he was here for that Overwatch tournament, I got to catch up with him a little bit. It's the first time I saw him since he got banned, right? And he's still just so laid back. He's like, yeah, I'm just, chugging along day after day, trying to keep the skills up. And that's it. Overwatch is what I'm doing right now, but we'll see in the future. And sure enough, now, there's a chance. There's a chance for us to see him come back into it. And he was an essential part of that team at the bat.
I mean, he was also a 3-time Reflex champion. I don't know if you remember that game. It was like alive for a very short period of time. It was basically like filler between, like, I guess Quake Live and Quake Champions. It was an arena shooter. So it was immediately following his ban, he started playing Reflex, and he won 3 world championships in a row, and then started playing Overwatch. I mean, he's good at every game he touches. He really is. Like, if it's a first-person shooter, he's good. And I think in general, looking at the old iBuyPower roster, he was always a player that got often overlooked. Everyone looked at the personalities of Steel and Dazed, the Op of Skadoodle, and the young Rifleman Swag. No one ever really looked at AZK and went, wow, like, this guy is insanely good. And no one really remembers the Source days to look back at, like, Team Dynamic and how good they really were and how big a party of that team he was.
Mm-hmm. It's true. You got guys who fall through the cracks sometimes. You really just don't get the attention they deserve. I mean, you have it even today. Although always my example is going to be like Zipnix, etc. But he's been getting some props lately. So I mean, even him, he's standing out a little bit, getting a little bit more attention. Kind of hard to do when you've got Dupree and Device on your team, right? Those guys just going ham. But all right, fair enough. The next thing that I kind of want to chat about, right, that I'm kind of interested in is how this league. Basically, they're not like super precise on the website, but they say this is an avenue into ESL Pro League, right? So what I was curious about is I was looking through, okay, so we have these teams competing in Mountain Dew League. But what I was also curious about is that how is this shaping up when it comes to the Premier League, right? So you got ESL Premier that's going on as well, and a lot of these teams are competing in that as well. And as far as I understood it, the top 3 teams coming out of that league would have a chance of getting into Pro League. So I was curious about, well, actually that's literally how it works, right? You get like first seed, just get seeded in the Pro League, and then you have the relegation matches for second and third seed. So I was curious, like, where does MDL fit into this as far as feeding into Pro League?
So right now, as far as I understand, because I'm like partially as confused as you are with the way the whole Premiership program works. We've got ESL Meisterschaft, ESL Premiership, ESL Championship National, the Masters, Spain, the Polish Premiership. It is a little bit hard to follow because the word Premier gets thrown around a lot, especially because this used to be Premier. But as far as I understand, it's still the same old format where the number one seeds from EU and NA both get an automatic spot, a bid into Pro League. And then the second and third spots have to play relegation matches against the bottom two, which as of right now, could be anybody. Like in NA, it's a bit of a mess towards the bottom. So we could see any number of teams playing any number of possibilities because it's still very early in the season. But I think, this is the part where I'm like, I think that the premierships feed into MDL, but I'm just like you. I'm kind of lost. It's not really super defined.
I was curious if there was going to be an extra slot, essentially, where you would have almost two chances, right? If you've got you've got Premier for ESL, but then you've got MDL that's running side by side with it, and both of these tournaments allowed you to get a chance to get into Pro League. Felt like that was interesting if you could double down and compete in both, or if you had to fully commit to one or the other, because it doesn't look like that's the case here. It looks like we've got these teams competing in both. So are there multiple spots up for grabs here? That's where it gets interesting. Because if you've got your top three seeds, coming out of, I don't know, Premier, for example, but they also made top three in MDL, how does that work out in the end? So, that's always going to be the main thing, man. When you have these simultaneous leagues running on, it takes quite a bit of coordination to make sure that the information gets across clean. And when you don't even have control of the websites that many people go to for this information, for example, I use HLTV and Team Liquid a lot, or Liquipedia a lot, right? I just couldn't find the information there. So it's one of those things that needs to kind of get stood out a little bit.
I think I just gave you a link there. That one explains it a little bit better, if I'm not mistaken. It's basically like the premierships do funnel into season 26 of MDL. I'm trying to claim up. Yeah, so season 26, the winner of the UK Premiership, Polish, 2 ESL Major Series and 4 from ESEA Main will move into season 26. This is just for Europe, naturally, not for NA. And Europe expanded to 27 teams for MDL, and additionally they added in VP. And then in season 27, 1 from ESL Germany, 1 from ESL France, 1 from ESL Spain, and 4 from ESEA Main will move up into MDL. So essentially we're like, so it becomes weird because some of the teams in Premier also compete in the premierships. Like Big was one that was winning for the premierships and also playing in ESEA Premier, in Mountain Dew League.
Well, this is where I'm curious. It's more, it just feels like you're crowbarring an extra step into the middle, right? Because if you're competing in Premier, you're competing for a spot or a chance, right, in Pro League, right? If you make top 3 in Premier, then you're competing for a shot at relegations or just a straight seed into it. And it feels like this gets interesting because what are they just adding MD? Like you're competing to get into Pro League, but now you're competing to get into Mountain Dew League to have a chance to compete to get into Pro. Right? Or or is that not accurate? It seems so this is what we're going off of here.
It does seem like all these premierships kind of lead into MDL, and then all of the MDL goes to Pro League. As far as I can tell, that's like the direct path for an amateur player wanting to become a pro player is MDL. That's your feeder system. That's your challenger system. So premierships, this is like just a change that happened coming into this season. Before that, it was just the ESEA League system. So you had Open, IM, Main. And then those teams were pumping teams into MDL, even with like number 1 Main, number 1 IM, top 4 Main were pumping into MDL. Now I think the change is in Europe, they're using the premierships essentially to feed teams into MDL. I don't know what happens if you're a team already competing in the premierships and also competing in MDL. That's something we'll have to find out. I'm trying to get that information now.
I'm looking at this right now where Virtus Pro will compete in MDL season 26 after relegation from Pro League. So they are establishing that. So it seems getting dropped down, and MDL is where it's actually going to allow you to get in. So interesting. Adding steps. It is, regardless of how it is, it seems a little fuzzy as far as, where are we in this chain and like how things are progressing. It is still commendable that, ESL, ESEA, Mountain Dew, getting involved to try and continue to add steps that allow you to actually get into these online leagues. That's huge for the community, seeing as how we've seen fewer and fewer LAN qualifiers, throughout time. I mean, apart from what I guess ESWC has like dropped off the map. They've got what, a 50,000 euro tournament that's coming up, and that's it. And it's going to be for French teams. It's not even international anymore. So we've lost another LAN where South Africans could come and compete, and the Australian teams could come and compete. We're losing more of these lands that kind of open things up. So I mean, point being, it's good to see at least another avenue here getting added to try and foster new talent. Got to give them that at least.
I mean, the whole idea of MDL from the very inception was this idea of crafting an environment where a semi-professional or an amateur player could get a path to Pro League. It's always been the goal. And the goal has also been expansion. And we've seen that. Like, you look at the other regions now. Look at where Australia was, like, last year even. Maybe go back even further. I remember our first Global Challenge, Season 22. We had the Australian team Chiefs. They were one of the few teams in Australia that had an org, and they didn't get paid. And I asked them about it. I said, what's the average pay for, like, say, an Australian CS team? They said, nothing. I was like, look at all the sponsors on your jerseys. You're telling me you get $0? And they said, yeah, we get nothing. We just get gear when we ask for it. That's about it. And now we have orgs putting players in team houses, and they're getting salaries, and multiple orgs are coming. And there's now 2 leagues in Australia. There's Open and MDL, and there's also Rank S coming to Australia. And the same thing's starting to happen in Brazil. You're seeing Brazil grow beyond just the teams that we stole from Brazil to bring to NA. We've already brought in so many teams. Yeah, that's true. But like we've actually taken away so many teams, and there's still leagues developing, still orgs building in Brazil, still stuff happening there. I mean, it's interesting to see that. It's basically the idea, the fundamentals of MDL showing their value. I love the expansion in Australia because I feel like Australia reminds me of NA a few years ago when you had a few teams who weren't like kind of just patchwork together. They were doing the best they could, but they weren't really getting representation. And now they're finally starting to get it. I remember when I first started getting interested in casting, teams were making like, I don't know, $300-400 a month. Things have jumped up exponentially since then.
I mean, teams like, the greatest teams, even NIP, were barely cracking €1,000 a month at the start. Barely. And they were the best. And they were dominating everything. And all the sponsors wanted to be up with them. And it was still like peanuts. I mean, it's unreal how quickly things have risen when you're at the tier 1, at least, when you're at the tier 1 level. Even when you are at the amateur level, right? I mean, when you have academy teams that are getting salaried, right? Like Tempo Storm, for example. They just got some Swedes over that we actually were able to watch at Gamers the first season, Limpone. They actually managed to pick those guys up. They spotted them there. They said, "Oh, okay, these guys have got some talent. We'll bring them over." And look at that. Now they're actually training in a team house for an academy team getting salaried. So I mean, yeah, it has definitely changed quite a bit. I mean, to be fair, this is also a way to try and foster new casting talent. The fact that it's been exceedingly difficult. Well, exceedingly difficult. It's completely changed ever since April 2015.
Yeah.
2015, when basically Star Series it probably was 14 when Star Series, ESEA, everybody started doing the leagues, instead of having the GoTV IPs open for everybody to take a grab at and stream. All of a sudden it's like, nope, we got to control this. It's going to be on our channel, on our studio. That kind of closed the door a lot on fostering new talent as well, or at least getting new talent to have some exposure. So MDL, not only is it helping the players, but it's also helping the casters. So solid there.
Yeah, I mean when I think you're right. It was 2014 when they started shutting down everything and started content controlling more, when orgs were looking into producing their own content leagues on Twitch, like ESEA and all those orgs. It was probably closer to 2014. But like in that regard,
April 2014, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I remember when I came in, like a lot of casters just did it because they loved it. They were doing what they did because they thought like, well, this is fun. I really enjoy it. Like for me, it was that I've been playing Counter-Strike since I was like 14 years old, 15 years old. I'm now 30. So I know that my chances of ever even cracking into MDL are very, very slim. And I have other responsibilities. I would never be able to dedicate myself to the game as much. But I wanted to stay connected to the community because I love the community. I've loved it for a long time. So for me, getting involved in event production was essentially the next step. So that's why I started casting. And I just did it because I loved it. And now it's become my full-time job. But I was lucky. It's very hard to push to that point because I didn't have things when I started, like all of these different platforms, or like MDL, for instance, who's giving casters chances. We've had multiple different casters who've come in the last year or so of doing MDL who had limited casting experience or none. Like, for instance, the matches we did today, one of our casters is a former player, Emo. He used to play for Ronin. He just decided to start doing it at a Fragadelphia LAN. We're like, hey, you did pretty good. And it's just slowly snowballed into him now. He's making money as a caster after just a few months or a few weeks, really, of getting experience. That was not something I ever really had when I started.
Mm-hmm. Oh, back then it was ad revenue only.
Exactly.
You know? And cross your fingers and hope that you're going to get a few thousand viewers. Otherwise, those ads, they're not going to make much money. Oh, man. That was, yeah, stroll down memory lane. Those are interesting days for sure. It was who got the stream on first, and that was it. You were rolling. I mean, well, now obviously things are much more structured with the likes of MTL leagues. Back up.
I mean, it's just cool to see, like, the difference today versus where we always were. I love taking strolls down memory lane. Like, that's one of my favorite things to do. Yeah, that'd be our producer here. Is he typing with a hammer?
Dude. Mute the damn mic, you German. All right, thank you, sir. Perfect.
But yeah, I mean, the difference today in all aspects, player levels, player salaries, the production, everything is just stepped up exponentially from when I started. Even just like my early days when I was not a caster, watching you cast with Anders on Nip Gaming TV back in the early days. Yeah. And then like some of the first stuff you guys did with Room on Fire, like even like just those small home broadcasts have gotten way better in quality, the changes that have come to that.
Well, it's like the home broadcasts. It's like home broadcasts almost has gone away, at least when it comes to like the tier 1 leagues. It's all about having a white label studio now. Yep. And that was the big shift that we saw in 2014, and that was when you had the likes of Fragbite Masters that was still kicking around back then. It's fun. You had I mean, it's a damn shame that Fragbite Masters isn't here anymore, because I think they were one of the last to really have that kind of esports spirit going, where it was still, it was studio, but we're all still having a good time and we're messing around, right? And I think they were putting a picture of oh yeah, that was right. They put a picture of a dildo when we were playing flutes or something, and then all of a sudden on the stream and stuff like that back then. Everybody was just like, hey, we're having a good time. Now all of a sudden it's just blazers and a lack of pants if you're Sponge.
Yeah, I mean, I remember working for ESEA when the shift to Pro League happened to the studios. So I was casting. I was so excited. I got an opportunity to cast a combination of what was then Premier before MDL rebranded. And Pro League, and I casted like only 3 or 4 nights of Pro League, and then all of a sudden we were like, nope, we're moving Pro League to the studio in LA, and Jason and Blue will be moving out there and doing everything from there. And I was like, so close.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's been there. It seems like there's a lot of luck and timing, and you have gotten the short end of the stick a few of those times, that's for sure. But I mean, dude, you're doing it full time now, so it's like still
exactly mission accomplished.
Yeah. I'm looking a bit through what we have here in the European teams right now.
Oh, that division is an interesting beast.
Yeah, to be fair, you still have some good talent here if you can actually look through, which I like. If you go to the teams page, you can actually see the players that are making up the rosters. But I mean, even if you just look at the actual names, it's like you still got Space Soldiers, like you said, alternate attacks running with Hunden, which is fun. I mean.
There's a ton of teams there. There's Kingwin, which would be like the number 2 Polish team behind Virtus Pro, although depending on how VP does this season, maybe they'll be the number 1. I still don't think you can compare them because of the accomplishments that VP has. But you also have Pride, who's another like lesser-known Polish team that's actually playing with Manice, who used to play with Kingwin back when they were Dobrian Gaming or Gamers 2 or whatever name they were at that point in time. Because it's been like the same team for the last like 3 years, just changing pieces here and there. We have Gambit. We have Nexus, which is the Romanian team. We've got a lot of talent. Like I actually listed down, like, holy crap, like this division in EU is nuts because the amount of teams who have legitimate experience, and not only that, like some of them, are major competitors. Gambit, VP, Flipside, that's a lot to look at.
I mean, hell, you've even got Team Spirit with Starix. Let's go! It's gonna be sick. The return, the glorious return.
And then there's some other teams in there that you're like, okay, well, maybe they'll surprise us this year. Like everyone keeps waiting for endpoint to really like pick up their game and prove that UKCS can hang, but fingers crossed.
Let me call up Henry real quick. He needs to get depressed again. We'll talk some UKCS.
It's funny that whenever I talk UKCS with UKCS people, they get so depressed. I'm like, it's okay. Like, people make fun of NACS all the time, but at least when I talk to them, I feel better about NACS.
Well, you feel like there are some glimmers of hope. I mean, particularly with how Liquid have been performing recently, Cloud9 as well, although it's never really sure with Cloud9 exactly where they're coming from. It seems like Liquid have actually got some kind of stable foundation to build on now, so that gives you hope if you're an NA fan and you're looking towards these players to kind of not rely on a Ukrainian to carry their asses. It's good. Yeah,
that's true. And then, like, you know, you look at like the MDL feeder system, and you're like, okay, I see promise in some of these younger players. Like, as much as we want to talk about EZK Swag and Dazed on GX,
yeah,
Dapper's a solid player, and I think Dapper, people really only know him because he's a rank S player. Same with Poyo, but ultimately, I think that Dapper can be really good, but he needs a good IGL to try and get him to like calm his nerves. I've watched him play on LAN. Jesus Christ, it is a nightmare. I like being his teammate must be really difficult because he's a very emotional young player. I mean, writhing, tapping his feet, slamming his desk. And I've talked to him before. I'm like, if you can calm down, you could be a serious talent, but you need to get that under control. And I think a team like GX with a leader like Daze, he's not going to let that stuff slide. He's going to rope that in real quick. He's going to be like, listen, you do that again, you're off this team. And he's like, you know, I'll go to somebody else. I'm sure he could easily ask a number of people and be like, do you want to play with me this season? And they'd say yes. So, you know, I'm looking at players like him or some of the guys from Rise Nation, like Moose is another young player. I'm like, okay, this is our future in NA. So as much as I'm looking at the current NA Pro League teams, I'm really excited about the current NA kind of foster system in MDL because we have all these young players who probably most of the CS audience has no idea who they are.
Well, absolutely, but that's what's going to be so beneficial to playing with players like Dazed. Everybody's going to be watching because, oh, it's Dazed. Great, we'll watch that. All of a sudden, they start to get some attention, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have known who the hell they are. You know, it's like Naventic. Okay, who's on Naventic? Well, Arya's on Naventic, but, you know, Arya, right? We've seen him compete on LAN before. But, you know, you kind of go past that. I mean, I'm looking for Org. Sabrosa is there. That's interesting. I've seen him in a little bit now. Unfortunately, Freakazoid is in here as well, which I would love to see. Definitely been missing a bit of the freak.
Yeah, he's playing with his brother, actually, his little brother. Cooper is his little brother, Austin, who I've watched kind of grind his way up through the lower leagues. He actually just joined that team this season. Freakazoid did.
Well, that's great. I mean, because Freakazoid always feel like he was hot-headed for sure, and he definitely took it on his shoulders to, how would you say, I mean, look out for his team, right? He was always very blunt about that. You know, it's like if you came at his team or anything like that, he was going to come at you, right? Kind of like how I was when I played hockey back in the day. I was a defender, and I just beat people up because I was like, if you touch my guy, then that's it. Like, you're over.
That's your job.
That's my job as a defender, right? Like, get the hell out of my crease. But Freakazoid, he kind of had that similar mentality, right? It's just, I think what was truly valuable at him, and Sean Garris has repeatedly said this, is that he was always able to build around Freak because of Freak's ability to create space for his team and willingness to take the really shit role of entry fragger. So that's quite cool. Glad to see that he's back in the mix.
Yeah, I feel like he was on a team that I've always wanted to root for Cloud9, but every time they make a roster change, Cloud9 has this like brief period of success, and you're like, yeah, Cloud9's finally done it. They finally made it. They're going to be good. And then followed by, it's like the honeymoon period ends, and man, do they dive. So like, let's look at even at like the ESL Pro League Season 4 finals, and then after that, you kind of saw things start to just slide off, and that's happened every single time. So I feel like those players. What?
It wasn't even in the summer.
Yeah, I feel like those players have a tendency to be the first ones on the chopping block. It's like, well, you were who we added, so cut. So, I mean, we can obviously, you can pull up stats. You can start playing these stats for whatever. I don't necessarily think that's the greatest indicator of who makes a good player, but it is good to see Freakazoid coming back. I want to see if he's just going to, like, shred people. Like, he's going to come into Premier, because he's mostly just been a streamer since he left Echo Fox, which, let's be fair, Echo Fox was kind of a meme. That team was... It was. I don't want to say much more because I feel like it would be too mean.
Well, I mean, it was. I mean, the way to look at it, I suppose, was life support. It was kind of just you had they were all five lying in their beds, beeping, pumping money, in the form of a salary into their veins to keep them alive until something better came along. There you go.
I mean, for Roca, it was a parachute. That was his way of getting up complexity. I mean, let's be real. No one else was offering up the buyout, so Roca joins that team, and then boom, I'm free.
Yeah, and that's Echo Fox was it's definitely a wild time. I mean, it's fun to see now that Sean is also getting into the media side of things with his videos on YouTube. It's not a bad call on him to do that. I'm curious about monetization. If that's actually how it's going to work out for him. But he's getting such good views that I imagine he should be able to pick up sponsorship and keep up that sort of work, at least on the side. So a little bit of a glimmer there for him. And going through some more of these rosters. Oh, I mean Muffin Lightning, right? We've had them here at E League, but Hazed on there. That's solid.
It's a different team than the Muffin Lightning that played at the E League Major, and we all were secretly hoping would make it in because we wanted that sticker more than anything. It's sort of a merger of what became Rush. So towards the end of Rush, Muffin Lightning and Rush kind of merged because Silent came in, then Aegis, and then eventually there was nothing left of Rush. It was mostly just Muffin Lightning. Then they brought in Hazed, who I don't think we've seen Hazed really competing since the whole ESG thing when he didn't show up. I don't know if you remember that. Hazed bailed on the land in China. That was the same year that Archimonde got banned for 100 years because he bailed on the MDL land and they had to play with the sub. So it's interesting to me. Muffin Lightning played with Archimonde, the land dodger who got banned for 100 years, and now they're playing with Hazed, who is also a land dodger but dodged the bullet of being banned for 100 years.
I guess Hazed has got a bit more pedigree, though, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I'm curious. It must be experience. It must be based around experience, something along those lines, why you would want to bring in a player like Hazed. It's not going to be for the frags, right? You're going to need him for something else.
Well, I mean, during the older days when it was still Premier, he pushed 2 seasons in a row, he pushed a team to Pro League and got cut immediately. I think it was the Denial team, if I'm not mistaken, or the team that became Denial, and then it was Savage the season after. He kind of got screwed a little bit. He was the IGL of a team that made to Pro League or Invite back then, and then both times he got cut. He had a really short stint too with Winter Fox, Luminosity roster, whatever they were at that point in time, when they were cutting people left and right, and then brought in all the Swedes, and then everything kind of went downhill from there.
Right.
Oh shoot, that's right. That's Hades, not Hayes. I'm talking about the wrong person. Derp.
Hades. Oh man, Hades. Yeah, that's another name.
That's what I'm thinking of. I don't know why I was mistaking the two.
I was kind of curious because
Team's right.
Well, I mean, it's kind of the same spelling. It's all good, man. It happens to all of us.
Yeah, sleep deprivation. I'll blame that.
That's always a safe one in esports. Always a safe one. I haven't had a good night's sleep in a week. I don't know, man. I'm having really intense dreams. So I'll wake up at 8 a.m. and I'm just fuck's going on in my brain? So it's good times. Not even casting.
Yeah, I'm up late doing a show until sometimes 4 o'clock in the morning, and then I have 2 small children, one of whom gets up for school every day at least 7 o'clock, sometimes earlier. So there are nights when I get maybe 3 hours of sleep. So I'll just blame sleep deprivation. It's an easy one.
Really? And you're not to, man. That guy's also up at 6:30 every morning, whether he likes it or not.
It's a grind.
Having kids and doing esports, man, that's brave.
Unfortunately, I did one, then the other. I didn't have the esports job first to go, yeah, hindsight's 2020.
I mean, hold on, let's see here. I mean, Sabrosa is a fun one as well, just because we haven't. I mean, he kind of made his brief showing in CLG, and then just disappeared again. I feel like that was, or at least it went under my radar at the time.
Yeah, he was playing with this team. They were District 7, and then they were French Canadians. Then they became District 7. Then they played at MDL as French Canadians again. They're one of the few teams that actually did really well in the group stages against the Europeans. They didn't make it out, but they played Kingwin. First game of their tournament was against Kingwin. It was 1917. They lost in overtime. I think they were the only team to actually get double digits as far as an NA team against an EU team at MDL. They also won the DreamHack BYOC. They were playing with Vez, who somewhat notoriously banned player, who came back and started competing, but they recently made changes. So their coach Stronglegs, who used to play with other teams in the past, like in some esports, other MPL teams, he jumped into the active roster. They actually only speak French during game, and sometimes to each other too, which we're like, you'll be talking to them and out of nowhere, they just start speaking in French to one another. The weird thing with them is that they brought in Riova, who played for Ronin, who was a Turkish player. So I guess that dynamic is gone. They're going to have to speak English in comms.
Or they just believe that
To learn French.
How can you do it? It's not like where you've got, in MOBAs where you can ping the map or something and then get your point across. Trying to bridge that communication barrier. CS is a little bit more on the nose. Although that did always have me wondering, right? When Flipside had the number system, where they actually had a system for each map where they sectioned off each bomb site, for example, and you would say, okay, 1, and 1 meant shadow, 2 meant balcony, 3 meant Tetris, 4 meant, and they would section off a map and just have numbers. And so you wouldn't call like a specific spot, you would call a zone. And so I've always found that fascinating that Blade would use that system because, right, how many times have you had it where you're like, oh man, he's they're in drop, but is he going, which way in drop is he going, or which or he could have moved from drop into connector, you don't know that. But if you're calling a zone, if you're just like he's in 1, it could mean like all of a sudden that player has to pay attention to like all of the different parts of that one zone, right? I mean, I guess it is kind of the same in a way, but I always felt like maybe that's a good way to get over the language barrier very quickly, is if you were to have, here are our maps, here are our zones, memorize these numbers, and then you're just calling that instead of having to try and remember, what do we call it in Danish? But you got to say it in Swedish now? Like, How does that work, right? Maybe, but that would require work. Definitely not happening in CS. Definitely not happening.
Well, not in NA, at least. I mean, you could even have like region barriers based on callouts. So for you, where's Pop Dog on train?
Pop Dog is ladder room.
See, in NA, Pop Dog is the bottom of ramp. And I guarantee you, if you ask Moses this, he would tell you the same thing. The train at the bottom of ramp in NA is Pop Dog. But for EU players, Pop Dog is ladder room. Because they both had Pop Dog trains back in the early days of Counter-Strike. So this is a mixed match call, and I actually ran a poll to see who would get it. And partially to Valve's design of the new train, because when you check in your map, there's that identifier in the top left corner. On the identifier for the new train, when you're ladder room, it says Pop Dog. This is actually a conversation that I've had with multiple different people, and all of the pro NA players say Pop Dog is inside, and anyone who's an amateur NA player or an EU player says Pop Dog is ladder room. So like you could even just have a differentiation like that. You could say he's Pop Dog, and they'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm in ladder. Like you even just dumb stuff like that where the call out, what it means, but it's 2 different locations on the map.
I've never heard this before. That's unreal.
Yeah, I didn't know about it either. It was one of those things I only recently found out like a month ago.
That's got to be like something where, yeah, I guess it wouldn't really matter, would it? I mean, if all your teams are on NA, then yeah, obviously you wouldn't really figure out that they're calling it something totally different in EU. I mean, the Danes for me have the most the colorful language, right? Because they're literally calling stuff whorehouse and dildo and stuff like that. You're just like, okay, we can never play those comms on the stream, but those guys are not, fun spots.
We used some of those in NA, but we just know better than to say them now. Like on Inferno, the pole coming out of pit was always dildo. On Overpass, the pole was often called dildo. It used to be crack house, but even that was like, well, maybe people will get the wrong idea because they think it's like a crack house where people are smoking crack, which is not the idea. It was because of the old little cracks in the walls.
It was. Sure. That's clever, man. That's a good way to how can we get this by, guys? How can we get this by? Cracks on the wall. Good shit, run with it.
And then you have Australia CS where they call all that stuff diggity, which every map has a diggity, and I don't know where it is yet. I still haven't figured that one out.
That is actually like the barrier, I guess, for them. It's like speaking the secret language. If you know, it's like passing your driver's license test in Australia. Where's diggity on Overpass? Okay, now you're allowed to play. Okay.
I remember doing a LAN event with what team was it? I think it was Enemy back when Relics was on the team. And every time we back then, like the whole listen in on comms was like something that people were all about, whereas teams weren't pushing back yet. So we would do it sporadically. And every time we joined their channel, they heard us join. So immediately they would start making out like ludicrous call outs, like, oh, there's one diarrhea. There's one diarrhea. And for the longest time, we couldn't figure it out. And eventually we discovered they were just trolling us.
Yeah, that actually didn't actually exist.
Yeah, no, there was no direct call out.
Points for actually. I mean, you're obviously gonna troll. I'm getting distracted because I actually just noticed that this team, Denmark, not academy. I mean, it's kind of the catch-all right now for some of the Danish talent that haven't quite managed to stake around at the tier one. Tensky, Loma, Glace. It's like those guys. We've seen them on different rosters before, Dignitas, etc. in the past. So that's man. I mean, there's quite a bit of talent. This EU section is pretty stacked actually. Like I was thinking, oh, okay, Gambit, right? The VP, they'll have they should have a fairly easy way through here considering their experience. But looking at some of these teams, there could definitely be, considering it's online. I mean, usually using the usual cliche, right? It's online, best of one, etc. I mean, you could still potentially get wrecked by some of these guys. Searson on alternate attacks. He's playing with Hunden. That's going to be an interesting team as well. I like that.
I mean, let's go back to like last season where we had Gambit competing. They had to forfeit like so many matches because they were playing at bigger events. Because ultimately, like the schedule is pretty rigid. We have to compete by the schedule. So if they can't make it to matches, they'd rather forfeit because they want to go play this international event. Teams like VP and Gambit and Flipside and any of those teams are going to have to make up their minds about what's more important for them, this opportunity to make this pro league or this international event that they might stand a chance of winning. So like we saw Gambit barely make playoffs. And we saw Gambit miss playoffs in the past because of the fact that they were forfeiting so many matches in exchange for playing international events. So outside of just potential, best of one upsets, there's also the chance that VP or Gambit or any of these teams ends up, with a losing record in the season because of the fact that they missed matches.
Are they consulted when, like, what I'm curious about as well is because I've always had this in the back of my head that Virtus.pro just didn't want to play in as many online leagues, and so they as soon as they realize, okay, we're not going to have a chance to actually make the land, that's it, they stop caring about the league and things just go south from there. But VP to me is one of the teams where they would be inclined to just participate in only one league, right? Just like focus on ECS, focus on, I mean, what do we have now? We got E-League, we've got ECS, we've got ESL, Mountain Dew League. What else have we got? That's pretty much it. That pretty much rounds most of it up.
Yeah, and then we have invite stuff like Star Ladder, but I don't know where Star Ladder is at right now.
Star Ladder is definitely more in like land territory now, where they just kind of do standalone lands. They'll have those online qualifiers every now and again for some of the lands, but I think the next one is China, and that's something that's going to be going down there. But I think that's just straight, invite kind of tournament. Yeah, Virtus.pro. I mean, I'm kind of curious to see how VP will perform in this, given do they just go full on lab work in a league like this, where it's like, right, if we're gonna ever test anything that could actually work on land, this is the place to do it. Just curious to see.
I feel like you have to if you're VP. Like, obviously things aren't working. Where else are you going to test it?
Man, that roster, man, I don't know where they're going to find talent. Even if they go for a roster change, who do you pick up? There really isn't anybody in Poland that's at the tier 1 level that's like a obvious, like no-brainer, like definitely this guy. It's like Valda in Denmark. It's just like everybody's fighting tooth and nail to get that guy because he's definitely got the chops. Who do we have in Poland that isn't on Virtus.pro right now that, Innocent, not really. Minis, not really. Mihu, not really. Like who do you go to and be like, that guy, we need that guy, he's going to make the difference? That's a real tough call for VP.
Yeah, I mean, Mihu for the longest time has been like the kind of the potential favorite, but we've seen in his time with Kingwin, I don't think he's as good as we expected him to be when that was first happening, which feels like it was forever ago. Because he played I think he played IEM San Jose like 2014 with them. He filled in, and people were like, man, this Mihu kid, he could be the next big thing for VP. And then that didn't happen. And ultimately he plateaued, and I don't think he plateaued in a place that makes him even a one-to-one replacement with anyone from VP right now.
No, not at all. That may be what has kind of put a drag on like developing Polish CS, right? I mean, that being said, you still have Lord who's in the works, right? And if you want to talk about a guy with experience who's been around as long as Neo, Taz, and the like, right? You should expect to have Lord be able to come in and be like, right, guys, this is how we play CS, and this is how we get to tier 1, and I'll find the talent and turn it into there's a legitimate chance with somebody with Lord's experience on your team to kind of build up, maybe not get surpass VP, but to at least get competitive. it feels really weird that we just haven't even seen that at all in Poland, right? Nobody, and this could be due to VP never going for a roster change. Like what, Denmark, Sweden, right? Something goes wrong, roster change. Something goes, and so you're recycling tier 2 talented and tier 1 teams, getting those guys with experience, and then maybe they get cut, but then they can take that experience at least and go back down again and start, continuing to develop. Whereas Virtus Pro never really done that. We've had one Virtus Pro roster for 4 years now, competing in tier 1 and kind of crushing everybody else, and not really allowing any other Polish teams to kind of get up there. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, what's the hope for you if you're a Polish player? Like, that's your number one team. That's how you're going to get all the opportunity. If you can ever make it in, then why bother?
Then again, now with how they're performing, this has got to be like, you better be Rocky mode right now. I mean, straight running upstairs, get that cardio going, and then just grind 12 hours a day to just, hope that you get noticed.
There is a young player. I don't know if he's actually young. I've watched him play a little bit. He plays for Pride, which is one of the Polish teams in MDL. His name's Morelzen. I've seen him play in the first match of the season, and I've also watched him play in Rank S. And what I've seen is promising, but that's a very, very small sample size. I mean, we're talking Rank S and MDL matches. I've never seen him play LAN play at all. I've never seen what he can do outside of just a very small subset of matches. But at least maybe there's something there. Maybe. I'd like to see him develop a little bit more.
No, we've had some players like that. I mean, Lekro, I don't know if it's due to him individually or due to the rosters that he's been a part of. There was a lot of hype around him when he first came in because he was playing in these online kind of pug matches and really stood out. I mean, I guess Rops is the other one that really comes to mind when you're talking about new players coming in from online leagues or pug matches, rather. Kind of curious. I mean, there has to be something there. There has to be something where you can say, right, he's got the aim at least. Now can we teach him the brain, right? Pug CS is, well, I mean, it used to be very different from LAN CS. Still is, but, feels like we are at a bit of a pug era right now.
Well, just let's look at, the players who have come up in, NA over the last several years. Like, Stewie was a pug god. Yeah. Stewie, in fact, when Stewie got picked up by Cloud9, everyone laughed at Cloud9. They all said, this is a dumb pickup. You're picking up a pugger. He hasn't really done much. He got bodied at his first LAN. He did not do very well. And then people a few months later were like, man, Stewie really needs a better team. It was ironic that the switch happened so fast. And then you have Tarek, too, who was kind of just this, aim-heavy, aim-centric, powerful fragger who's now an IGL for his team. So you can have that potential where it's just a kid who just grinds hardcore pugging, DM, just becoming an aim god to the extent that someone goes, let's take a chance on this guy. And they have the right talent fostering that young player to teach them to play the game the right way rather than just run around and try to shoot stuff.
Mm-hmm. That has been the struggle for Stewie in particular, I think, considering he came into a roster, I think, expecting to get vetted and trained in that way. And then they're just like, please lead.
Yeah.
What? that is always going to stand out to me as one of the most mind-blowing bits of news we ever got, where you have the veterans who are just like, please, young pug star, lead the team.
And now there are no veterans. Tarek is the veteran on that team.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess you could consider Skadoodle to be one of the vets as well.
True.
But I mean, Skadoodle as well has never been known for leadership qualities. Much more of a down-to-earth fellow, kind of just doing his thing. Good teammate, though. Good teammate, Skadoodle, but not the one who's going to kind of take the reins and drive the team forward, it seems. I mean, he seems to talk more than he did back on the dazed days. The I by Power days where he just didn't talk at all. Now he seems to actually communicate a little bit better, but slow things.
I mean, he was known as kind of like a mute player. He's a background player. He's a soldier, not a commander. He gets told what to do. He doesn't often dictate, at least from what I've seen in his entire career. I can't imagine a scenario where he would lead. He just seems so soft-spoken. Mm-hmm. It's not a role that necessarily I could see him stepping into.
No, but who is it that stands out for you right now in in-game leads? Who's kind of coming up through the ranks? Do we have anybody that we can point to and be like, right, this is interesting?
That's always the tough one. I feel like that's a role that, especially in NA, has long since been forgotten because it's a hard one. It's a hard job to take because you have this kind of pug-heavy mindset in NA that's starting to sort of die off, but still really very much there. I'd have to actually look through and see like who can I really point at and go, yeah, this guy's a decent in-game leader. Expect to see big things. I mean, we do have teams like CLG Academy that actually have a coach that's coaching them. I think Ruin is the coach of CLG Academy. We also have, the French Canadians who are going as L for Org or whatever their team is right now. That would be Strong Legs as their coach, who's pretty much in charge of commanding the roster. Obviously, we have Adren, but I don't even know if Adren is actually calling right now for Mythic, because you actually have Lex on that team too, who technically could be calling. I'm not sure.
He's calling in PUBG, I guess. I don't know about CS.
I mean, obviously, we're
like what? They were rank 1, weren't they, for a while in PUBG? I think they were.
Yeah, he was rank 1 in squads.
Yeah, that's legit. I was watching a bit of the stream when they were on that grind. It was pretty fun to listen to. Still the same kind of communication that you would expect in CS. Actually, the communication was very good there. It was kind of fun to hear that in PUBG. It was like, okay, then they're calming as if this was a game of CS. This is kind of weird to listen to considering the game we're watching right now. But a lot of fun to watch that a little bit.
I mean, in general, the leadership in Premier or in MDL is shifting away from players more and shifting towards coaches. I'm seeing that. Like, we have the teams that do really well have a coach that leads for the most part. Like, Rise Nation is also random. Mask Off just picked up AGM. He's now coaching the team.
But are they
See, that's what I don't know, because I'm not sure what they're. I mean, I would imagine if they aren't, the in-game leader is basically just relaying the information provided from the coach.
Yeah, because that would be. I mean, to me, that would stand out a bit as a red flag, just because you would be building bad habits. Imagine you do get into the tier 1, and then all of a sudden, well, you're dealing with tier 1 rules where coaches can't communicate. Imagine you're building up with in-game leaders as a coach. Bit of a sad state of affairs. You can still give it to them, though. I mean, the more it is interesting, because I was having this discussion with a mental coach, not here in and we're kind of looking at the differences between how esports players handle difficulties and trials, right? Things aren't right, sorts of things, versus how somebody, from the sports background, the sports side of things would handle a player, right? And he was just telling me the main difference, or the big difference, is that you just got years and years of structure in sports versus a very player-centric kind of approach on esports, where there is no structure. Players are used to having no structure, playing for themselves and not really believing in the team, not having a coach to look up to, not having that focal point that is driving everything ship, and it's just acknowledged. That's just the way it is. Right? There is no star player who comes in and dictates the way it happens in esports or in CS, where a star player can just say, "I'm not doing that for you. I'm going to do what I want to do." Right? I'm thinking a bit about Guardian back to Starks. Right? Starks would say, "Why are you buying Deagle Kevlar? Please don't buy Deagle Kevlar. Save for your AWP so we can have that in the first round." And I'm just like, no. I'm going to buy my Deagle Kev. Do you imagine a basketball player, going to the coach and saying, coach is like, please take less 3 points and maybe try and go for some left or something? The player's like, oh, I'm going to hit my 3 points. Probably not, right? Point being, in sports, there's that accepted way, which is that the coach is God, and then you have the staff around the coach, let's say minor deities, and then the players are there, and then but players always have that kind of support from the deities above them to kind of take the hit, have somebody to say, right, okay, this is the structure that we're in, structure in esports. Players don't have that support structure to turn to, and so that's why teams tear each other apart, because there's nobody to kind of take the reins and say, stop acting like children, this is the structure, this is how we're supposed to do it, I'm the one leading, right? Whereas esports, it's just everybody just goes mad, goes wild, because the coach has no power, and the players haven't been trained to accept the coach having power. That was a bit of a rant. Sorry. Get the point?
All good. Yeah, I mean, that problem is pervasive in NA, especially because I feel like, there was rewards to playing team-centric Counter-Strike for the last couple of years in EU before NA really caught up. Like, everyone always asks me, why do you think NA is behind EU CS, especially even at a lower level? And I say, well, because we didn't have DreamHack, we didn't have Copenhagen Games, we didn't have iSeries, and we didn't have ESL doing LANs in NA. We had nothing. Effectively, the NA scene was online Counter-Strike. And one of the keys to becoming a prominent online player was basically just raw stats, like showing everyone how big your dick was. That was basically what you did in game. You had to measure up against other people, and the only way to do it was statistics. And that's what people would point at and go, he's good because he got, 1.1 FBR and 128 ADR across the season. He's nuts. Whereas now, like, it's starting to shift back. And I do feel like there's this like diva-like mentality in NACS where if you're one of those mechanically gifted players, you do whatever you want and you don't have to listen. You're in charge. You're in control. The coach is just there as an accessory for the other players. It doesn't apply to you. And I see some young players. I'm like, man, this kid is mechanically skilled. He could be something special. If someone would take him and teach him how to play Counter-Strike and tell him to like shut his mouth and that he's not in control. And I don't want to point out names, but I am going to like call out the name of a player who I think is very promising and with the right leadership could be nuts. Is Sick. Sick playing for Misfits mechanically is like one of the better mechanical players I've seen in the last year or so. But I don't know if I'm going to see him escalate any higher than where he's at because I don't know what kind of leadership control Sean Gares has over him as a player. I remember watching him come up to the system. He played with a team called Ignite early on. That was him and Reki, Paul Newman, Vice. And like that team was solid. They actually all have gone on to do better things, with the exception of Paul Newman, who got banned for trying to buy a roster, and Reki, who never really cracked past main. He played like 1 or 2 seasons in Premier before MDL, if I'm not mistaken. But those players all had that. The difference is that we saw some of the players kind of step away from that. Sick, in my mind, could be one of the best players if he can, like, if the whole I'm just here to shoot people thing can get like kind of reprogrammed in his head and he can develop more as a player. And I think that's one thing that Stewie did really well. Talking to players about Stewie and what changed with him when he came into the position with Cloud9, he was no longer just a pugger. He didn't want to just run around and aim. And while he still can do that really well, he also learned the game. He was watching demos. He was researching his opponents. He was actually paying attention to the game around him. He was learning the larger picture instead of the small picture, which is your crosshair placement. And I think there are a couple different talents like that in NA that they're just waiting for someone to like kind of open their eyes and show them that bigger picture, and then they could be like this crazy NA talent.
Mm-hmm. There's just so much that that these players have to learn in order to actually compete. I mean, Stewie is a perfect example, seeing as how not only was he forced to get away from that pug style and start learning structured CS, he was forced to take over the lead. And when you're going to take over lead, you have to work on your communication. Well, you have to work on your communication regardless. But I feel like communication is the big thing. Understanding how, and this again comes back to that point of, having the support structure around a sports team where you have the different points of contact that you can go to. If it's defense that you're having a problem with, you've got your defensive coach that you go to. Then you've got, basically God who's overlooking the whole thing. I mean, who can act, these guys, it is their job to identify problems in the roster and say, right, okay, this guy is failing on communication, right? My job is to get him up to snuff on that, da-da-da-da-da. There was nobody there to kind of hold these players' hands and point at specific problems and say, right, are you practicing efficiently? Are you going into a practice just to frag, or are you going into practice with a goal in mind? Each day you are going to work on this problem and say, okay, today it's going to be smoke executes. We're going to run through our entire inventory of smoke executes and pinpoint where we're going wrong with them. And right, that's our goal for today, no matter what. Effective practice is a big actually it's a big thing even with tier 1 teams. I feel like a lot of tier 1 teams, from just tidbits that I've gotten here and there, right, it's that a lot of tier 1 teams don't even still really treat practice as practice. Instead, just kind of treat it as glorified pugging and DM. So I mean, it's like we're talking about MDL, but a lot of these things can even carry over even into the tier 1, where I think a lot of players just kind of cheat on mechanical skill and still just rely almost like a crutch just on mechanical skill to get them through in those moments. I mean, look at FaZe. They're like the glorified mechanical skill team where, do they need a strong team, a strong tactics? Do they need any of that? No, they've got Nico who's going to go and rip 4 players' heads off. And then you've got Guardian and Olafmeister right behind him. And hell, even Rain. It's like that team doesn't work on strats. That team's just got aim. It's all good.
Well, it's kind of like you'll hear players talk about it all the time. Just because a play works, it doesn't mean it was the right play. Well, for a lot of players who are mechanically gifted, if that weren't true, every play would be the right play. Because every time they do something dumb and it works out because they can out-aim their opponent, that was the right play. Mm-hmm. Well, no, there's a right way and a wrong way to play Counter-Strike. And sometimes, your mistakes don't get punished. That doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. And I feel like a lot of players have a hard time escaping that. If you watch just what's happened with some of the, top teams as they've sort of tapered off and their success became, failure and the team started making changes, I feel like a lot of that becomes complacency because you're like, well, we already are the best. Done. well, no, you still work. Like that's one thing I've always loved about SK is I feel like even if their performances and the results don't match up with what you once saw from the team at any given point in time, the team never stops trying. Like they never stop practicing. They always continue to work. They never get to a point where like, well, we're the best team in the world, take it or leave it, and we're just going to play our game, and we're not going to work anymore because we've already reached the top. Whereas I feel like other teams that kind of did happen, and you've actually seen players kind of tease information about that, saying like, one of the reasons we were struggling was because we hit this high point, and we felt like we were just better than everybody else. And our practices became lax. It basically became a pug. We didn't really put the same effort as we did when we were grinding to be that best team.
I think that was Fnatic's fall, the demise of Fnatic, the god tier Fnatic. I'm talking about that roster where it was Ulf and Dennis and winning 6 LANs in a row. I mean, I think that was the great fall of that team, was the fact that even in interviews, it wasn't like this was hidden. They just didn't boot camp. They didn't practice. They didn't boot camp. They just showed up and they played. And you're like, okay, yeah, you can ride that out so long as you believe that you are the best team in that server, and you will make the comebacks because you just believe that that's how things are going to go. And sure enough, that worked for them 6 times in a row. But as soon as they hit a bump in the road, as soon as they lost, they had no structure to fall back on, nothing to actually build from, right? Knowing, right, we know this strategy works because we fine-tuned it on a prac server, doing it 10 times dry runs to make sure that we've got it all down. They didn't have anything like that. And so all of a sudden it turns into chewing each other apart. And, Wolfmeister's doing all right now, I guess, but
yeah, that's true.
I've got to kind of catch up again.
I think NBK kind of teased that was going on with Envious at one point too.
Yeah,
Envious had like this rise to the top for a while. It was like the French scenes were just stealing players from one another, and then finally things kind of like settled down, and we had this really strong French team, and they had risen to the top, but then they fell off. And I think if I remember correctly, he had kind of said that that's how the team had gotten, like things had gotten stale because they had gotten complacent because people had just been comfortable with where they were.
Because you start believing that you are untouchable.
Exactly.
That's a very big trap. I mean, we can talk about teams throughout the span of leagues or throughout the span of seasons, but hell, throughout the span of a half of a match of CS, the number of times you watch a team playing perfectly, right? They get 8-0, 9-0, and then you're thinking, man, they could really close this out if they keep this level up 16-0. Why not? And then what happens? They get complacent. They start taking their pedal off. They start their foot off the pedal. They start looking for frags when they shouldn't be, and they stop doing what got them that far. They stop actually playing the perfect CS and start horsing around. And that's where the mental discipline really has to come in for a lot of these teams, and that's where a lot of these tier 2 players, that's what they're going to have to learn. I think that's the big thing, is that we know you have the mechanical skill. It's whether you have the mental discipline to play as a team and play on that level. That's what's going to get you up there, right? That's what MTL is going to be about, right? Seeing these teams, who's got the chops to be able to make it into Pro League, and then we'll see. But fun times, man, fun times. That's an hour on the dot.
Oh wow, we did it.
We did it. Dot. But yeah, I mean, good talk actually. I feel like I've brushed up on my NACS, something that I haven't really seen too much of lately, the Tier 2 NACS. So that's good. Glad to see that there's movement.
I mean, honestly, we've only scratched the surface. There's just like so many storylines and player histories and roster changes. And I mean, it's the same thing for EU, really. Both divisions, the coolest thing about MDL now is like it's actually becoming a league. Whereas like when Premier in the past was just an afterthought, these were the teams not good enough for invite. These were the teams that weren't quite ready to play at a higher level. Now Premier is becoming, or now MDL, I should say, is becoming such a big deal that we're seeing trickle down into main. We're seeing orgs representing teams in main because there's a chance they can make it to MDL, which means there's a chance they can make it to Pro League. And I mean, obviously, there's one thing that drives it all: money. It's the almighty dollar. So like everyone's trying to get in. They're giving money with the hope of making money, and it's booming the lower leagues, and I love that. I love the fact that we have so much representation for Premier. It's legitimizing everything. It's honestly reaching a point now where MDL is basically invite 10 seasons ago. Because reality is invite 10 seasons ago, I think the prize pool was pretty much on par with what we're giving away for MDL. It's close.
Yeah. No, it's definitely there. It's definitely there. There's motivation. And I'm glad that's a good way to end it, in the sense that, guys, if you've been missing out on MDL, definitely be tuning in, checking out some of these up and coming rosters. It sounds to me like there are some exciting players that are definitely worth keeping an eye on. And I think Boq, we're just gonna have to do this again.
Oh, okay then.
We're gonna have to just chat it up again and get on some of those juicy storylines. I mean, now there are matches getting played. We've started this new season, haven't we? So there are already matches that have been played, and we're gonna have matches regularly every Tuesday through Thursday, right?
Yeah, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday for EU and NA every day.
Every day. Well, every week.
Every week. Excuse me.
Every week.
Words.
And how long does the season last?
I'm pretty sure our offline event is going to be in December, so I don't have an exact number of weeks, but that will be ending. It's a little bit more truncated than some previous seasons because I know that we've actually had to nix the possibility of having a Brazilian team playing at the offline event because they wouldn't be able to get their visas in times.
Right.
So I believe it will be running up until the month of December. I'd have to actually dig into it to figure out the exact end date.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, guys, there we go. League is going to be lasting quite some time, actually. So lots of CS on top of everything else that's going on. It's good. We can always turn to it. But this is going to be your source for the Tier 2 to see who can actually make it up into Tier 1. And, well, I mean, exciting times. But, Boq, it's been great chatting with you, man. And like I said, we're going to have to do this again. It seems like there's just so much information to go over. We'll be a little bit more structured next time, perhaps, maybe.
Yeah. Ah, I lost him. Did we lose him? I think we lost him. All right, well, I guess I'll close things out since we lost Semmler. He's on a freeze frame. Rest in peace, Semmler. Appreciate you guys coming by. You can catch everything on ESCA's Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/ESCA. That's where we'll be streaming all of the NBL action. And hopefully next time he'll be able to throw us out a little bit smoother. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you soon.